Welcome, my bountiful friends. Prepare to investigate that strange scraping noise in the attic and pierce the thin veil of reality. But whatever you do, don't read that hefty ancient tome that your missing uncle left under his bed, because today we're going to be taking a look at one of the most significant writers in the genre of horror, H.P. Lovecraft. The founding father of the modern horror genre was unquestionably Edgar Allan Poe, and today's reigning monarch is unquestionably Stephen King. But linking these two giants of dark literature sits H.P. Lovecraft. I'll be delving deep into his background, looking at his most significant works, his style, and his impact on literature and culture. Beware of spoilers, for they will be slithering out from every dark corner. And I will of course be muttering my own extremely subjective musings throughout. You have been warned. Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in Providence, Rhode Island, USA in 1890. He was the only child of Winfield Scott Lovecraft and Sarah Susan Phillips. The Lovecrafts were a family of reasonable wealth thanks to his grandfather on his mother's side, who was the fabulously named Whipple Van Buren Phillips, who was a successful businessman. Madness and mental institutions would feature prominently in Lovecraft's work, and this was probably inspired by his own father's committal following the onset of advanced symptoms of syphilis. This event occurred when Lovecraft was only 3 years of age. Living in a household with his extended family, which included his grandparents, he was taught to read and write from an early age and was also schooled in the classics and was familiar with the Greco-Roman pantheon by the age of 8. He also had an interest in the sciences and astronomy. By the age of 10, his grandfather's business concerns took a downturn, and it was the start of a slow but steady decline in the family fortune. Upon his grandfather's death, Lovecraft's mother was unable to maintain the large family home, and they had to downsize to a smaller home. This change in fortunes had a profound effect on Lovecraft and would leave an indelible mark on his life. Throughout his schooling, Lovecraft was something of a loner and a recluse, and he was troubled by long periods and bouts of illness that were probably psychosomatic in nature. General poor health would also be a continual occurrence throughout his adult life. Despite his patchy attendance, he performed well at high school, excelling in the sciences. It was at this time that he began his first writings, at this time with the works entitled The Beast in the Cave and The Alchemist, which immediately indicates his interest in writings of a macabre nature. After school, he became an amateur reporter and spent considerable time reviewing and critiquing literature. In 1914, he was appointed chairman of the Department of Public Criticism, which was part of the United Associated Press Agency, and a mere year later, he was promoted to vice president of the UAPA. And 2 years later, after that, he became the president. During this time, his Anglophilia came to the fore and was very evident. He viewed Britain as the ancestral home of America and had a predilection for British English words and spelling over American English. He was an early advocate of the US joining World War I to assist Britain. He even attempted to join the US Army and then subsequently the Rhode Island National Guard, but was thwarted by his mother, who used family connections to prevent this, which again indicates the level of social standing enjoyed by the Phillips family. In 1919, tragedy struck when his mother was committed to an institution just like her husband. Lovecraft would visit her often, but she succumbed to her illness in 1921. It was in 1919 that Lovecraft met and befriended Frank Belknap Long, who would become one of the primary writers within the Lovecraft circle. It was in this year that Lovecraft began to write in earnest and started to produce a number of short stories that would form one half of all his writings, known as the dream cycle. These stories were directly inspired by his own very unusual ability to have and recall incredibly vivid lucid dreams. From 1920, he would also begin to write the stories in the second half of all his writings, the Cthulhu mythos, although that particular eponymous story would not emerge until 1926. The very first of this vein was The Crawling Chaos, and it marked a fascination for haunted locales in the real world that were borderlands to other dimensional or cosmic realms, or else inhabited by a hidden or lost denizen or two from these places. In 1921, his world would change when he met Sonia Green, a Russian Jewish immigrant and New York divorcee. Against his family's wishes, he would marry her in 1924 and move to New York City, which was the first and largely only time he lived outside of Providence. Initially, the move was very positive, and he made new lifelong friends and joined writing clubs, and would even get commissioned to do some ghostwriting for the world-famous magician and escapologist Harry Houdini. He was supported by Green's income, but after she lost her jobs and savings, she was briefly supported by him, but the limited nature of his work experience meant that he struggled to find adequate employment. Green would in the end secure a new job that involved her moving to and working in the Midwest, which meant that Lovecraft was effectively left in New York City on his own for an extended period. In the end, unable to find steady employment and beginning to suffer from ill health, he returned to Providence and his family in 1926. He would move into a house owned by his aunt and remain there until 1933. It was during this period of relative calm and stability, and in this particular location, that he entered into a spell of prolific writing and produced most of his most prominent works, including Call of Cthulhu and The Shadow over Innsmouth. Most of Lovecraft's stories would first see publication in pulp magazines that were highly popular in the 20s and 30s, and would be the genesis point for much of today's mainstream fiction. His first significant story to be published was Dagon, which appeared in the October 1923 edition of Weird Tales, which would become the magazine most associated with his writings. He would earn a semi-regular small stream of income from these publications, just enough to scrape by. Unfortunately, due to his temperamental nature and obvious neurodivergence, he missed opportunities to successfully prosecute his work into print by either annoying editors, simply abandoning submitting his manuscripts because he had received criticisms, or by failing to respond to interested publishers. In 1936, Sonia Green, who by this stage was living in California, asked for an amicable divorce, which Lovecraft agreed to, but unbeknownst to her, he never signed the final decree, which of course is not good. In 1936, he saw The Shadow over Innsmouth into small edition print, but unfortunately it sold poorly, and worse still, his substantial novella, At the Mountains of Madness, received criticism which served to bring about a significant bout of depression and a decline in his health, which effectively ceased his writing. Lovecraft, like a lot of people at the time, stayed away from doctors and just tolerated the pain of what he thought was gripe. He was subsequently diagnosed with terminal cancer a mere week before his death. He would pass in March 1937 at the age of only 46 in the city of his birth, Providence. Lovecraft's literary style and themes were shaped by several key influences, blending classic horror, gothic fiction, science fiction and philosophy into his unique cosmic horror. He was also influenced by mythology, astronomy, and scientific discoveries, which often shaped his depiction of indifferent cosmic entities such as Cthulhu and Azathoth. Lovecraft regarded Edgar Allan Poe as his greatest influence, particularly in terms of atmosphere, psychological horror, and language. Stories like The Telltale Heart and The Fall of House of Usher inspired Lovecraft's emphasis on insanity and decay. And also the work of the Welsh author Arthur Machen, with such works as The Great God Pan, introduced Lovecraft to the theme of hidden knowledge and ancient lurking horrors. The idea that reality is fragile and dark truths lie beneath the surface greatly influenced Lovecraft's own fiction. And then we have the British author Lord Dunsany, whose mythological storytelling and dreamlike settings heavily influenced Lovecraft's dream cycle. Lovecraft would adopt Dunsany's elevated prose and themes of lost, mystical worlds. The fourth great influence on Lovecraft was probably Algernon Blackwood, whose use of cosmic horror and the supernatural greatly impressed Lovecraft, especially in tales such as The Willows, which portrays an unseen malevolent force beyond human understanding. All of these influences combine to create Lovecraft's signature style, where horror arises from insignificance, forbidden knowledge, and the vast uncaring cosmos. As already mentioned, Lovecraft primarily wrote in two separate veins, which often overlapped. He wrote the dream cycle, which is the lesser known of his two styles, and concerns a series of interconnected stories that explore a vast, otherworldly dreamscape that were significantly influenced by his own vivid and lucid dreams. These were written from his earliest beginnings as a writer in 1910 and continued all the way up to shortly before his death in the 1930s. The most significant of these were The Cats of Ulthar in 1920, a dark fairy tale set in the dreamlands and concerns felines of a fabled city getting their revenge on a cruel couple. Also in the same year we have The Doom That Came to Sarnath, which is a cautionary myth delivered like an ancient legend about supernatural retribution on a once great civilization. Then we have 1926, The Silver Key, which contains large elements of autobiography and features Randolph Carter, who is middle-aged and disillusioned with life. He discovers the means to enter and explore the dreamlands. And then we have The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, written in 1927 and published posthumously. This story also features Randolph Carter on a quest to the eponymous city, during which he encounters Nyarlathotep. His most widely known works are known as the Cthulhu mythos, which is an interconnected universe of cosmic horror filled with ancient aliens and a pantheon of alien gods. It is characterized by forbidden knowledge and madness. This body of work is actually much greater than that of Lovecraft's own writings and consists of contributions by other writers such as Frank Belknap Long, Robert E. Howard and August Derleth, to name but a few. Other prominent writers continued to build on it throughout the 20th century and even to this present day. The most significant stories in this vein are The Call of Cthulhu from 1926. Cthulhu is a sleeping alien god who slumbers in a city beneath the Pacific Ocean. The tale concerns an individual who learns this terrible truth and is pursued by a cult as a result. Then we have At the Mountains of Madness from 1929. An Antarctic expedition stumbles across ancient alien ruins and learns the terrible truth about the Earth's past. From the same year we have The Dunwich Horror, which is about an investigation into an odd New England family of recluses and their human god hybrid who terrorizes the countryside. Then in 1931 we have The Whisperer in Darkness, which is a story about an alien race who are conducting mining operations in the backwoods of West Virginia. Their operation is discovered by a human outsider and dire consequences ensue. Then we have The Shadow over Innsmouth from 1936. As mentioned before, this story actually saw print in Lovecraft's lifetime. It is about a man who discovers that a New England town is populated by cult members who worship the Deep Ones, who are a hybrid alien race which live in the sea. My own personal favourite story is The Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which would be published in 1941 after Lovecraft's death. It tells the story of the eponymous character who resurrects a long-dead ancestor who happens to be a notorious sorcerer of ill repute. Lovecraft's protagonists possess a decent spread of professions. They could be students, sailors, explorers, policemen, geologists, reporters, etc. But there is a slight preference for professional occupations, and he has a penchant for professors of various hues and occultist scholars. They do all tend to be middle-aged too, with 40 years of age being the average. The most surprising aspect of his protagonists, though, is that they are 100% male. There are no female protagonists in sight, which might be a reflection of the patriarchal domination of society, which was still very much in place during the earlier 20th century. But seeing as 60% plus of his protagonists are doomed or dead by the end of the tale, and just about all of them are heavily traumatised, then perhaps the ladies are lucky in their absence. In fact, the doomed or haunted hero is very much a Lovecraft trope that is carried through to the writings of the other authors in the Cthulhu mythos. The most significant of all of Lovecraft's characters is undoubtedly Randolph Carter, who appears in multiple stories and serves as a stand-in for Lovecraft's own dreamer persona. Unlike the doomed scientists of the Cthulhu mythos, Carter actively seeks out the dreamlands, yearning for the mysteries beyond mundane existence, and he gets to survive too. When looking at the antagonists of his writings, there's a good amount of diversity. About a quarter of the time, the main antagonists will be humans of various ages and gender who are engaged in occult practices. These people are sometimes encountered as lone individuals, or a peculiar family with a history of witchcraft, but quite often they are cult members, or they can even be an entire community, such as in Innsmouth, who are either working in league with alien entities or worshipping dark alien gods. Almost half the time the main threat is a monster of some kind, which is often of extraterrestrial or interdimensional origins. Sometimes it's alien races or servitors, and a quarter of the time we actually get to encounter alien gods directly in the story. Whatever the nature of the antagonists, they are always operating beneath the gaze and radar of human society, and are far in advance of it either through magic or technology or both. They are always far more deadly than the protagonist, who stands little chance of besting them in any given situation. The protagonist may end up dead or doomed just from merely knowing about the existence of an antagonist. The strongest part of Lovecraft's creativity in regards to his characters is his creation of a unique pantheon of alien gods and alien races. He rarely, if ever, relied on the typical or traditional creatures of horror fiction that were already popular through films of the day, such as werewolves, zombies or vampires. His creations are now so well known that AI tools are actually having trouble discerning the likes of Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, Shub-Niggurath, Azathoth and Nyarlathotep from actual historical myths. This is no doubt aggravated by the fact that in most cases they were inspired by historical mythology such as the Norse, Greek and Roman pantheons, and in some limited cases he actually directly adapted actual mythological gods such as the Babylonian deity Dagon. And here ends part 1 of the recording. And if I've got my acts together, there should hopefully be a tile in the screen right now to allow you to access part 2. Thank you.